First, who killed my party? A prominent member of the New South Wales Labor Party wants to publicly confess that his party has been compromised for decades by influence peddlers and deal makers. Now battling cancer from St Vincent's Sacred Heart Hospice in Darlinghurst, Paul O'Grady, a member of the Upper House for 8 years to 1996 and a ministerial staffer and advisor since then, wants to speak out. He called this program after the latest revelations that the Independent Commission Against Corruption adversely named former Minister Ian MacDonald and one of the party's biggest property donor developers, Ron Medich, and his associates. Mr O'Grady says such has been the culture of the New South Wales Labor Party that for years a blind eye had been turned by those in power at the parliamentary and organisational wings to what was really going on within.
The Labor Party is very good, if I could borrow those words of Monty Python. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more. And this is a situation which has been going on for a very, very, very long time.
Paul Francis O'Grady, 51, is battling cancer. Throughout a public life of almost 25 years, he joined the Labor Party in 1975 at the age of 15, he has been noted for his often brutal honesty. In 1990, at the age of 30, he was one of the first MPs in Australia's history to publicly acknowledge his homosexuality.
Paul O'Grady, why bring down the wrath of prejudice on your head by publicly admitting your homosexuality?
Well, I don't see it as an issue.
This at a time when the fear of AIDS, with its then increasing death toll among gay men, was at its height. Paul O'Grady himself was diagnosed HIV positive before his resignation from Parliament in 1996.
Look, I can never really remember, but I'm one of the earliest cases of HIV in New South Wales. 310 was my number originally, because in those days you didn't give your name, you had a number because of the fear and loathing of HIV at that point.
This is an opportunity to support a basic human right.
Paul O'Grady was at the forefront of campaigns to end vilification and discrimination. He was in Labor's soft left faction, coincidentally sworn in at the same time as Ian MacDonald from the so-called hard left. They never became friends or confidants. Paul O'Grady won Upper House pre-selection only through internal proportional representation reforms introduced following the infamous Peter Baldwin bashing at the hands of right faction thugs.
I used to go along to, the Marrickville branch and all those sorts of branches with Joe Meisner and Tommy Domican and it was all pretty steamy, heady stuff. These people would try and intimidate you and stand over you and, follow you to your car, or just all that sort of intimidatory things. And Baldwin was an amazingly brave human being who stood his ground, came within an inch of his life, a terrible, terrible, terrible bashing, which should have no place in politics.
But as a consequence of that, the party did change.
Well, it did to some extent. But fundamentally it never really did. It glossed over things, it maybe tinkered at the edges, but we never dealt with the real issues of Baldwin, and we still see those today.
Do you agree with Anna Bligh, the Premier of Queensland, after the recent unpleasantness federally that there exists what she calls New South Wales disease?
Well, yes, I agree with her absolutely.
You seem to be indicating that this culture inside the Labor Party has been well known, but no one done anything about it.
Of course not, because we all know the totally obscene amounts of money that General Secretaries Roosendahl and Habib in particular have raised. And this is the way money is raised, by engaging people and, making commitments and promises and the like.
But there's a difference between slush funding, Mr O'Grady, and corruption, isn't there?
That is correct. But we are talking about massive quantities of fundraising, Quentin. Massive quantities of fundraising.
But to be criminal, you have to say you've got the money and the decision is, the favourable decision has come out the other end. That's what is defined a criminal form of corruption, not just slush funding.
That is correct, and it's always very hard to link those two together. But the Labor Party, to use Anna Bligh's terms, the New South Wales disease has perfected that to records that no one has ever seen before.
The New South Wales branch became the biggest fundraiser in the history of the party, and I think more than the National Secretariat.
By far. The National Secretariat has always been the very, very, very poor cousin.
Mr O'Grady says only when the ICAC started to expose property development corruption at Wollongong City Council in 2008 did the New South Wales electorate get a real sense that his party had allowed itself to be compromised by the deal makers.
I think in the public's eye, the City Council of Wollongong was the point where the light came on in people's mind. I mean, people talk about electricity as being, the issue of the point of decline, where in fact, I think if you really look at the polls and polling, it really shows that Wollongong is where we started to absolutely go through the floor.
What did you think about the ICAC's performance after the Wollongong exposure, which admittedly it did expose?
Well, it did, but it hasn't resulted in any cultural change for the New South Wales branch of the Labor Party. And I think that's one of the saddest things arising out of the Wollongong ICAC inquiry. We haven't changed the fundamentals of the party. We haven't gone to the root of the problem and determined to come back to be a party of integrity and honesty and good policy decisions.
Mr O'Grady does not spare former Premier Bob Carr, who ruled the state for 10 years to 2005, from his criticisms about the culture within, particularly with Ian McDonald's elevation to the Carr cabinet in 2003.
I remember when Ian McDonald was appointed to the ministry, I got a phone call on the Friday afternoon before the election to say that Kim Yaden was going to be defeated and Ian McDonald was going to be renewal. Now, I know when I've confronted Bob about this, Bob has used his great puppetry skills of ignoring my questions. But Bob Carr, as the Premier of this state, was the one who allowed him to come into his cabinet. And Bob Carr has some questions to answer on this issue.
Well, why do you think he did that? It must have been a factional deal of some kind.
Well, of course, because Sussex Street, that's what they determined, and Bob just hopped along with the tune.
Carr was a puppet of Sussex Street, or a very effective one?
Oh, a very effective one, but a puppet of Sussex Street, even though he would hate that, right? He would be soundly offended by that. But that's the truth.
And your historic charge against Bob Carr is that he did nothing about the characters within the party.
Correct. Against Tripodi, against Obeid, against McDonald, against Rosendale. The list can go on.
Another hurtful incident was the party's neglect and mistreatment of Gillian Snedden, a Swansea electorate secretary who courageously assisted police to get probative evidence leading to the conviction of the sexual predator, the then Labor government minister Milton Orkopoulos. Gillian Snedden was ostracised, traumatised and lost her livelihood.
She's someone who's been destroyed. And I would just like to take this opportunity of thanking Barry, the Premier of New South Wales, for fixing up and assisting her in trying to resolve this issue. Because she has been destroyed, as many people's lives have been destroyed out of that matter. And that is a true tragedy, and it's something which still eats me terribly, because I think it was another example of nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more.
Now facing a struggle to survive, Paul O'Grady wants to leave his party with this heartfelt plea.
Please, 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 be honest, be forthright, and let's put and value the democratic institution that we are part of, and let's not belittle it and begrudge it. Let's go out there and be honourable and honest and decent and put good government in place.
And we haven't had that.
I don't believe so, no.
Your party has been compromised?
I think so, yes.
By?
By dollars. And I know people will say I'm naive and, you know, you've got to have funding to run political... Well, that's true. But, you know, the Labor Party, I understand, is in $2 million worth of debt after 16 years in government and just absolute record fundraising. How can we go into opposition in debt?
Well, you've blown all the kitty by the sound of it.
We've blown all the money, as I understand it.
Is there any way back for the party?
Look, I'm very pessimistic, but the Labor Party has a great history, but our base is so declined, and I think we're in for a very, very, very long, bleak period.
Paul, you've been having some transfusions, and we're going to finish the interview now. What's the prognosis for you?
Look, I don't know, but what I know is that the people here have just been absolutely wonderful to me. Their care, the nursing staff. I've had challenges before. This has been the toughest I've had, and I suspect I've probably got a few more to go through. But I never give up, Quentin. I never give up.
Paul O'Grady, thanks very much.
Thank you, sir.